We still do 7 NUFC Matters show a week for free. But if you want to help support NUFC Matters, then there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast and video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications bell so you don't miss a single show. If you want to help us financially, then you can join the channel using this button with the membership starting at $1.99 a month. Or you can drop us a donation in the chat using a super sticker. We're also looking for sponsors. If you'd like your brand advertised on the flyers for the show and featured during the ad break, then email John at nufcmatters.com to arrange today. Hi, welcome along to Eddie Howe's press conference for the Sunderland away game in the FA Cup third round. Takes place at 12:45 on Saturday, and Eddie was in front of a packed media crowd today. Reza was first up from BBC Radio Newcastle, and he asked him about the injuries. He asked him about Kieran Trippier. Eddie said that there will be a late fitness test on Trippier today, so potentially hope that the skipper could be back for the big game at the Stadium of Light. Not good news on Callum Wilson. The calf injury is not too bad, but it's bad enough to keep him out of tomorrow's game and the Manchester City game. A little period of rest though, and he should be okay for the Premier League fixture against Aston Villa. Reza then asked him how ready he was and how ready the team were, and he said he was ready, and he felt that the lads had trained well. There was a good vibe around the training ground this week, and that the players know what it means, which is good news. Reza then said that there's a few Geordies in the squad, and that a few in the team, of course. Does that help, with the preparation for this kind of game? He agreed. He said that when the draw was made, that we made reference, to the fact that we had, plenty of Geordies and Newcastle fans within the squad. He says, I gave the Geordies a chance to speak to the players when the draw was made as well behind the scenes. And he says, since then, they've been playing a role. He says, all of the players, who needed to know about what this fixture meant now know, and we're going to do, what we've got to do, and really, take the game to Sunderland, essentially, is the feeling I got from Eddie today. Reza said, is this a perfect game for you to get a big result, after the last few results that you've had? And he said, we hope so. It's the next game. So this is the game where we want to hopefully turn our form around, and we're going to try our best to deliver. The FA Cup hasn't been good to you, was Reza's next question. How important is it for you to get a result in this particular game? He laughed a bit and just said, well, I'm well aware of my record in the FA Cup since it came to Newcastle. It has been very disappointing. And he agreed. He said, yeah, look, I'd like to be able to make up, for those two games with this game. We want to do well in this game. Where do you see the threat coming from? Sunderland, asked Reza. He just, as he always does, very polite, waxed lyrical about the Sunderland team. He said they're a very good team. They're young, bright prospects. He said, I can see threats coming from the wide areas with the players such as Roberts and Clark. He says they've got a good midfield. He says, but, we respect their club. We respect their players. He says, but our team has been well briefed. It knows what we want them to do. And, it's up to us how well we play as to what the final result is. Keith Downey was next up from Sky Sports News. He said, you said that you gave the Geordies a chance to speak. What did they say? He wouldn't divulge what had been said. He said it's best to keep those kind of things internal. Keith then said it's been 8 years since the last derby, but within the squad you've still got Lascelles and Dummett. Lascelles, of course, played in that game in the 1-1 draw at St James's Park. That must be, that must help in your preparation, and you don't often see that at clubs. And he said, yeah, look, he says you don't often see that. He says they've both been on the same journey, but slightly different journeys, and he said, Dummett trains every day, doesn't get many chances, but, he is loyal, and he's a big Newcastle fan. He says Lascelles has been pivotal in recent weeks and recent months. He says, but he says it is important for me. He says that they've both experienced the game against Sunderland in the past, and that can only help, moving into this particular fixture. Is it important to have a core of players who understand what this game means? Asked Keith. And he said, you need that in your team, ideally. He said, it's always good to have a sprinkling of local players within a squad because they'll know the expectations of the game. He says they know the history. And he said, obviously, we've got a couple of players who've played in the game. He says, so, yeah, he says, it's great to have characters within a dressing room who've been there and played on the big occasions and can help others and inspire others around them. Has your understanding of how important this fixture is grown? And when were you first aware of it? And he said, I was made aware pretty much, well, very early in my Newcastle tenure. And he went, how early? And he said on the first day. He says, but since then we're in different leagues. And he says it hasn't been relevant. He says, but he says I knew before I joined Newcastle United how intense this rivalry was. And it's our job as coaches and manager to get the team to the best level for this particular fixture. Keith then said, my postman will be relieved that you know how important this game is. He's been going on about it all week. And he said, look, you can't escape the build-up. No matter how you try. But believe you me and the players know what it means to the fans. Keith then asked him about the branding at the Black Cats Bar, which, was all over social media yesterday and all over the news today about a corporate area which had Sunderland signs removed and Newcastle banners and signs put up. Is this 1-0 to the fans, is what Keith asked. And Eddie wouldn't get drawn into that. He says, look, I don't feel I can comment on that. What happens at Sunderland Football Club is up to them. Mark Tulip from the BBC was next. The way the season has gone, especially in recent weeks, is this game more significant now, we asked. He said yes. He said, we don't underestimate, Sunderland. He says, but they're our next opponent. And it gives us the opportunity to return to our best form. He says, and we're determined to do that. He said, believe you me, the players are hurting in all aspects. He says, our away form hasn't been great. That has been a concern, but we're working very hard to put that right. Mark then delved a little bit further. He said, obviously, you've had your injuries. He says, but do you think a lot of this is, the bad run over the last few weeks, it can be attributed to that, or is it attributed to the psychological side of things, or is it a bit of both? Eddie just said, look, I've never really expressed, that to the players. I've never said that they're burnt out. I've never pinpointed one particular thing. He says, and what we've tended to do is just carry on doing what we do and block out the distractions. Crowd size was next on Mark Tulip's question list, and he was pointing to the fact that Newcastle have 6,000 fans going down there. How much of an advantage will that be for you? He said, not specific to this game, but he says, in any away game, he says, you want numbers following you. And he says, and that's one thing we've had. He says, we will hear them. And he says, we want to repay them for their support tomorrow. And that's our aim. Is it different pressure on the team now after last season? Is this, bad run you're going through, and the fact that you're out of the Carabao Cup, you're out of the Champions League, you've got the league and the FA Cup, and that's it now. Is it a different type of pressure? Eddie just said, look, we were aware that this season was going to be different. We knew it wouldn't be a repeat of last year. Last season we were training, week to week, and didn't have the other competitions. Whereas this year it's been different. So we knew it was going to be different, and that was how we answered the question. He then Mark asked him about January. He says it tends to go quickly. Are you trying to see a bigger picture before you make decisions? And Eddie said, yeah, look, that's a good way of putting it. He says, we need some short-term business, to add to the dynamic that we've already got. But that was it. He was no more committal than that. Certainly nothing on the horizon, you would imagine, at this moment in time, with the answers that Eddie gave today. Chris was next. He said, after the Liverpool game, have you been able to train a little bit more? Because obviously the issue has been that you haven't been able to train with, playing 3 games a week. And will it make a difference? Eddie said that they had been able to train a tiny bit this week, but the first 3 week that they were going to have where they would be able to specifically train was going to be after the Sunderland game. He says, but this week they have been able to get on the grass and make a little bit of a difference. Chris then mentioned that this game brings unique pressure. How much will you as a manager feel that, and how much do you think the players will feel it? Eddie said that he didn't feel the pressure. He says, I don't underestimate the game or what it takes to manage the team for this particular fixture. He says, but, I can only coach the team, and we have to try and control, the way that the guys play and control their emotion. He says, every player will be different, but it's our job to make sure that, the team collectively play the game and not the occasion. Chris then mentioned that last year, before the Carabao Cup final, Eddie specifically shut down talk about it. Is it been the same for this? Have you tried to shut down talk of the Derby game? He said, look, the difference with this game as opposed to last season's Carabao Cup is that, we've had big games over the last few weeks, and he says the Liverpool game was a huge game, so we've not had time really to listen to the background noise that surrounds the Derby. He says, until now. He says, I'm sure the players will be aware. He says, but we can just do what we do and try and ignore the background noise. Damien was next. Are you getting a different perspective about the Derby game from your children with you living in the city? He said, look, the kids are fully immersed in the region and in Newcastle United. He says they're coming back from school with bits and bobs from different kids. He says, but I'm not sure whether the rivalry's developed yet. I'm sure it will as they get older. He says, but they're still critiquing my decisions. He says, I'm getting constructive criticism. He said, as everybody laughed in the press room. Damien mentioned the VAR decision from last night involving Everton and Crystal Palace. Are you happy that there's no VAR in this fixture? He didn't commit to saying that. He just said, look, it's contentious at the moment. He says, we were on the end of 3 calls at Liverpool. And he says, last night, again, it showed that it's not working as it should. It's as simple as that. Lee Ryder from the Evening Chronicle was next. He said, go back to the PSG game. He says that first 10 minutes where players were making tackles and saluting the crowd and applauding with the crowd and getting them revved up. He says, if you could bottle that level of intensity, that's what this game's all about, tomorrow. What's your thoughts going into it? And he said, look, that night against PSG, he says, we hit the sweet spot. He says, we hit the levels. He says, but he says, if you go too over the top with your emotions, it's, it's dangerous. And he says, if you go too low, it's dangerous. He says, so we need to get in the right place. He says, the emotion of the crowd is really something which will play a big part. Lee then mentioned that the physical side of the game, you can't go over the top in this fixture because we've seen red cards handed out before to both sides. And he said, that's where we need to use our experience. We've played in the Champions League. He says, that's no guarantee, by the way, that, we'll be successful. He says, but we need to be smart and we need to navigate the emotional pitfalls. Lee then mentioned the talk in the press over the last week about Bruno potentially going to PSG. It could happen at the end of the window. Would he be happy though if, by the time we got to the end of January, Bruno was still a Newcastle player? He didn't talk about Bruno specifically. He just said that he wanted to keep our best players at the club. And, Of course he does. Craig Hope was next, talking about the derby as everybody more or less was today. Is it more likely that you're going to be, going at full strength, picking a team as if it was an FA Cup final as opposed to an FA Cup third round? Eddie just said, "Look, I pick a team based on each game. I pick a team to win. He says we did it in the FA Cup against Cambridge. Obviously we lost the game. He says because we couldn't score. We never pick a team that we think is not going to win a game. So no different against Sunderland." Craig then mentioned that the signage story at Sunderland yesterday there's a theory that it has stoked the Sunderland fans even more, and the atmosphere will be greater than we're expecting. What's his thoughts on that? He said, "Look, I think regardless of the crowd and what's gone on, he says, we'll play the match. He says we blank distractions out, we play the game, we use our support, which will be 6,000 strong, and it'll be incredible, and we use that to our advantage." Ian Murder was next. He said, "The last visit you had as a manager to Sunderland, you relegated them that day. What's your memories of that game?" He said it was a tough game. It was a good win for us. It's a really good arena. The pitch was good that day, but we played well. He says, but it's important to remember that tomorrow is a completely different game. Ian then moved on to the Sunderland crowd, how it can be a disadvantage as opposed to an advantage, because if Newcastle can get on top early doors, the Sunderland crowd will quieten down and start moaning and groaning, and it'll work for us. Eddie said, "Look, whenever you play away, that happens." He says, "If you can get on top, then you nullify the crowd and it works to your advantage." He says, "But we haven't played well away from home this season, and that is something we need to improve. If we do that, of course, that could happen." Dominic was next. He basically then he was asking questions about Newcastle and Sunderland priorities. He says are different for both teams, for Newcastle and Sunderland this season. Is it fair to suggest that there's more on the line with this game, though, for Newcastle? Eddie said, "I can't speak for Sunderland." He says, but I can't downplay this game for us. He says, after the recent set of results that we've had, we're going to give everything we can to win the game. "How's your nerves?" asked Dominic. "No different," he said, "in terms of how I feel." He says, "Players, of course, will have a different mixture of feelings and emotions, I'm sure." He says, "But for me, it's the next game, and it's the game I want to win." Luke Edwards was next, and he said, "You've probably experienced most things as a Newcastle manager. Now, would you see this as the last kind of act?" Which was a bad way of putting it, because it made it sound as if you say, "Well, if you get beat, are you going to get sacked?" Eddie laughed. He went, "I hope not. Cheers, Luke." But Luke said, "Look, he says, what I mean is this is a tick in the box for the experiences you can have as a Newcastle manager. This is another tick that you've got in your box." And then he said, "I'm sure you'll be fine." He said, "Look, it's fair to say from my perspective that I'm looking forward to managing Newcastle in this particular fixture. You want to play in the big occasions, you want to play in the big games." He also said that I'm looking to win the game. I'm not looking, to manage Newcastle United for the experience. I'm looking to manage Newcastle United to win games and to win things. So, simple answer, really, to a complicated question. Have you got a message for the fans? Because this game has got a history of crowd trouble. They've got the unusual travel bubble experience for fans on this occasion. Eddie just said what any good manager would say: "I want to keep everyone safe, enjoy the game. I don't want to see any injuries, and behave in the right way." Simple as that. "How are you getting on with recruitment?" Luke squeezed that one in at the end. He just said lots of work going on behind the scenes, but no details. Next up, Mark. Didn't get his surname. After the defeat at Anfield, the reaction from fans was positive. What's your thoughts on that? Eddie says, "I always take a lot from what the fans give us." He says, "in testament to them," he says, "I can reflect back on a game against Spurs," he says, "where we didn't play particularly well, but they backed us." And he says, "Why are they doing that?" Well, I think it's because they see that the players are giving everything. They're leaving the pitch, empty. And we never take the support for granted. We value it greatly. And, I think that, the away supporters are certainly backing us because they know we're giving it our all. Bit of external noise on your position was Mark's next question, and about his managerial place being under pressure, and has he had a vote of confidence was the gist of the question. He just said, look, we communicate all the time, myself and the owners. I don't need daily reassurances. He says we're working hard to get the right results, to turn our form around. He says, but I get it. It's a result-based business. But yeah, I do feel like I've got support. Chris was next, and he just said, when you look back at the last 2 FA Cup games that you've had as a Newcastle manager, have you learned anything? Of course, Newcastle lost against Sheffield Wednesday and lost against Cambridge under Howe's management. I'm not sure, he says, because those games came in different moments. He says the first game against Cambridge, we were in the middle of a relegation battle, and our focus was on that. He says we wanted, of course, to win the game as a springboard. He says, but we didn't. We lost the game. He says, but then being knocked out of the cup that season probably helped us. It probably grounded us a bit. And, we went on to play Leeds away and won that game. And, we got out of a relegation battle and now we've been able to rebuild. He says the Sheffield Wednesday game had a different feeling. We weren't at our best moment again. He says, we're very disappointed to go out at that stage. Don't need to be reminded on how bad we were. But yeah, losing's a habit, I guess, is what he was trying to say. And you want to get out of that. And, hopefully tomorrow is a big opportunity for Newcastle to do that. After the Man City game, you've got a little break. Are you planning on a warm weather trip away to Saudi, or, have you got other plans? You may have a replay, of course, if you end up getting a draw at Sunderland. He went, no, not short term with regards to a trip away. We might look at that later in the season, he said. Kieran was next. It's a long time since Newcastle won a derby match. Is there an incentive? Is this an incentive for your team to go out and, make history? He said, look, the players are fully aware of the recent record. It is a long time since we won a derby. He says, but whether it adds extra motivation, I'm not sure, because the players are already highly motivated for this particular fixture. Have you gone through the archives of these games? He went, no, I haven't, but there's still time. Simon Bird was next. He says, some suggest that this game sets a tone, about your position. He says, and it's been, monumentally proven in days gone by, in years gone by. Pardew, of course, went soon after a derby defeat, Rude Hullet, to name but 2. He says, you're following Luke Edwards' kind of thinking, are you? He says, look, it's a game that we want to do well in, and I'm not thinking of that. We want to win this game. How many Sunderland players get into the Newcastle United 11 was another question that Simon Bird said, some people find it difficult to answer and get tripped up. And he said, I'm avoiding getting tripped up, so I won't answer. Oscar was next from the Sun. He said that Beale in his press conference had said, if you take away the money, there's no difference in the size of the clubs, Newcastle and Sunderland. Eddie swerved it again. He just said, I'm not getting into a war of words with any manager. He says, it's not wise. He says, we know who we are and we know what we want. And he said, whatever happens in the future is definitely bright for Newcastle United Football Club. What do you think of Sunderland? Have you been there? He said, I'll not say what I think of it. He says, but I have visited a couple of times with my boys playing football, and I'll say it was an interesting experience. Make of that what you will. Martin Hardy, have you ever watched a derby either in the flesh or on TV? And what's your memories? And he said, on TV, I've watched many a derby. He said they've always been interesting games to watch as a neutral. He says, I remember some classic games, he says, which I won't reference because it's not what the Newcastle fans will want me to remind them of. He says, but I can get a taste of what it's all about. I can see from the reactions of the people's faces in the crowd. And he says, those games will live long in my memory. He says, but yes, it is. It's definitely fuel for us. Can you believe that both teams have not won a trophy in so long? Sunderland, of course, last winning a major trophy, the FA Cup in 73. Newcastle, last domestic trophy, 55. He said, look, I can only, again, speak from Newcastle's point of view. But he says, from our side, that's what we want to deliver. We want to deliver a trophy, and that's something that we need to address in the future. Could a win kickstart your season? Said Martin. He said, I'd kickstart. I'm not sure I would use that word. He says reboot, potentially, and help change the internal and external view of Newcastle United. He said, I've spoken in previous press conferences about the performance against Manchester United, which was our best of the season. He says, but now we've gone, full circle, and, we're going on a bad run at the moment. And he says, with the players, that, confidence is a big thing, and, it can be fragile. So yeah, a reboot is the way that he would prefer to describe it. Dom then asked him about the enormity of this game and his tenure, managerial position. He just said, look, I can only say that I know how big this game is, but we've played in the Champions League, and then that's it. He wouldn't be drawn into any talk about, his job potentially being under fire. It was then Louise's turn. She went, you've got Shola Amiobi, who works for the club. Have you thought about bringing him in to talk to the players? The Mackham Slayer scored a few goals in the derbies. He says Shola's a very positive person. He says he's an ex-player. He's got lots of stories to tell of his goals. He says we love him a lot. He says he's hard work, and he says, of course, if he can help, then we will utilize that. Louise asked the last question of the press conference. She went, where is the fuel gauge as far as Newcastle's players are concerned? And he went, full pelt this weekend. We've got no excuses. So there we go. That's your press conference review today. Andy, how you doing, mate? Our resident Villa fan. Hope you're doing well. A big game for you against the Borough. We were talking about that on the North East Footy Breakfast show this morning. I've tipped Newcastle to win 2-1, and I tipped Villa to win 3-1. So there's my predictions for you, Andy. Les, I hope you're well. Paul Gallant, I hope you are well too. Mark Wagstaff, jolly nice of the Mackhams to deck out the black and white cap bar for the fans. What a farce that was. What a farce. Really, really was. Adiri, hope you're well. He says, how are you? Newcastle United. Adiri, you still need to spell my name correctly. Wraith. Are you Newcastle United? And should they sign De Gea, Kevin Phillips move to Newcastle United, Hugo Ekitike, Johan David, and Solanke? Kasari signed for Newcastle United. Okay, from what I can make of that, Jerry, I would say that, I think there'll be maybe one of those players could move to Newcastle. Will it be in the January transfer window? I very much doubt it. I would have to say, permanent signings are going to be probably this summer from what you're getting from Eddie Howe in these press conferences. Will we sign anybody on loan deals? Yes, potentially. Will Kevin Phillips, you're saying it's Calvin, you mean, from Man City. I would imagine that, that will not go through from what you're hearing. Again, that's only my opinion, my view. Solanke, again, is he going to move to Newcastle in January? I very much doubt it, especially when Bournemouth are relying on him so heavily. I think the summer will be a bigger window, but never say never. You never know with Newcastle. Previous windows, let's go back to the very first one in January. Kieran Trippier, Chris Wood, Bruno, Matt Targett, Dan Burn all came in. January last year, or this in 2023, we only brought in Darren Coyle, Harrison Ashby, and Anthony Gordon. 3 permanent deals though. So is that possible? Could Newcastle do something like that? Yeah, maybe. But the likes of Gasari, Solanke, Ekitike, I can't see it. I hope I'm wrong, but I can't see it. Les, apparently Pritchard and Clark, for me, but for me, it's the referee, Craig Pawson, just talking about the game tomorrow, of course. I have watched Sunderland, Les, and against Preston, they put in a good performance. But if Newcastle turn up and Newcastle play well, then for me, there is only one winner. But Newcastle have to regain the form that they had 4 or 5 weeks ago to go down there and get a result against Sunderland. But looking forward to it. Okay, that's your press conference review. The Amigos is on tonight, 5 o'clock, 2-hour show, 5 till 7. Please hit the reminder. If you just click the bell, which is on the actual program that's been set up now on YouTube, and there's a little drop down menu, and if you just click all, then you'll be notified for all of the shows. And hit the subscribe button. I know some of you watch this on TV, some of you watch it on YouTube, so the subscribe button is in a different place on YouTube and on your computer. If you can do that today, great. If you watch it on TV, just go on to NUFC Matters on your computer and just hit the subscribe button. It does us a big favor. It's free. All this content is free. We do 7 shows a week. It does mean a lot to us. Okay, I will be back tonight. I'm going to play out with the ads. See you at 5 o'clock. A big thanks to all our sponsors. Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Website skipsandbins.com. Easy contract, free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks again to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. If you'd like to order some, then give them a call on 01768 210 102. Go to the website, mrvickies.co.uk, or drop them an email, info@mrvickies.co.uk. A big thanks to United Group Travel. They're a family firm based in Morpeth with pickups throughout the Northeast. No strangers on our tours, just people you haven't met yet. They've got a presence on Facebook and a website, unitedgrouptravel.com. If you want to make a booking, give them a call on 01670 632 460 or mobiles 0791 666 4174 0795 71 41654. Thanks to Darren Baldwin Funerals, independent funeral directors. Let us look after you in your time of need. They're based on Old Durham Road in Gateshead, and you can contact them at their website, darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk. Email darren@darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk or give them a call, 0191 478 2730. A big thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the technical side of things. And a big thanks to New Workwear. You can find them at newworkwear.com. If you want to help the channel, hit the thumb up to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and share to your other social media. You can also pay a one-off fee of £25 to get a scarf, a cup, a pen, and a membership card. Go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and click membership, or put your smartphone over this QR code. We also support the food bank on this channel. If you want to make some donations virtually, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and make a donation today. We're also a podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and other podcast providers. Just search NUFC Matters. I'm also a part of the Northeast Footy Brekkie Show. You can listen to that Monday to Friday, 7 till 9 at thetooneuk.com. We've also got an event coming up next year. It's in January the 19th at the Tyneside Irish Centre. It's an evening with Nobby Solano. Tickets are available on voucher for £20. Don't forget, Supermac and Gibbo do every pre-match at Louis Liquor Store. It's free entry, children welcome, and there is great food by Fed's Fried Chicken. They're usually on pre-match and sometimes post-match at Louis Liquor Store.